Ronnie had a big cutthroat razor, and just as deliberately as any surgeon would wield a scalpel, sliced him down both cheeks.
In 1970, double killer Norman Parker arrived at Parkhurst Prison, home to some of Britain's most violent inmates, including both Ronnie and Reggie Kray, who, like Norman, were in prison for murder.
I knew I was going to be found guilty. I was, what they say, banged to rights.
Norman Parker spent 24 years inside Britain's toughest jails, with some of the country's most notorious criminals and gangsters, like the great train robbers and Frankie Fraser.
I suppose for the vast majority of prisoners, the worst day is the day they get sentenced. But not necessarily so, because I knew I was an accident looking for a place to happen. It was very, very inevitable. So to me, it was like any other day. The trial come to the end, I knew I was going to get life imprisonment. I was in a particularly troublesome phase, and I was moved around. I was involved in riots and escapes and other acts of violence. And I got thrown out of Wormwood Scrubs prison, and I ended up in Parkhurst prison. At the time, Ronnie and Reggie Kray was there, together with a very good friend of mine called Joe Martin. But the Krays had been put in C Wing, which was a special psychiatric wing. Nowhere was there a wing where there was such a concentration of violent men. And that made for a very heavy atmosphere, because the same 12 mentally disordered patients, prisoners, would see each other each day, and they'd see the same warders. And Ronnie and Reggie complained long and hard that they couldn't have a sensible conversation with anyone. Well, the ring was run by a Dr. Cooper, head of psychiatric services, not only for Parkhurst, but for the whole southwest region. And he tried to give the Krays a bit of leeway. And Reggie said to him, he said, well, look, he said, there's lots of London faces, lots of London criminals we know or we know of. Could we have a visit once a week out on the sports field? And a friend of mine, Kenny Bloom, he came up to me, he said, you've never met them, Norm, but they know you and you know friends of theirs. Would you like to come out and do a visit each week? And that's how I actually met them. But I think Eddie Richardson came out, Kenny Bloom, a couple of other people, and we'd go out in the sports field and spend 2 hours talking about people we knew, all the latest news, the present prison system. I spoke mostly to Ron. And the thing with Ronnie is this, he was the most polite man you'd ever meet in your life. Polite to the point of unctuousness. He believed in politeness. He believed in a man had a duty to behave in a certain way. He'd talk in a little bit of a high voice. Hello, boy. How are you? How's your mum? Do you need anything? You let us know. If you want anything, me and Reg, we'll get it for you. And you'd look at this man and you'd know that behind that very polite facade was a very, very violent guy. And you know of occasions when people had been rude. Not grossly rude, but just say something that was just slightly making fun of them. And normally you'd get a reaction from someone if they're upset. They'd jump up, storm away, say something. Not Ron. Not Ron. He'd just get up, go over to Reg, you know that C, you know what he said? We can't have that. We've got to do something. So he was more the driving force, the dominating force. And Reg, of course, would make one with him, and they'd go and do whatever they'd had to do. The one I got on best with was Ronnie, because I chose to speak to him. I think we had 3-4 visits, so I must have spent 6 to 8 hours. I did speak to Reg, but I found him quite a fascinating man, Ron. And also, I think the other people on the visit would rather be talking to Reg. It was easier to talk to Reg. You didn't have to be careful, very careful about what you said. And we found quite a lot of things to talk about. I mean, I mentioned I've just left Freddie Foreman behind at the Scrubs. Yeah, a good man, Fred. Like this, very much like, I suppose, two plumbers meeting, talking about other plumbers that they know. Amongst the conversations I had with Ronnie told me that he was doing some painting. And he said, I'll give you one of my paintings. So I thought, oh, that's nice. Next time I go out, and I thought to myself, I'd better be a bit careful what I say here. I've got to say something a bit constructive. I don't want to be too critical. And he got out a painting, I suppose it was about a foot by a foot long, and it was just the sort of thing somebody's 3-year-old daughter would do. Unbelievable. Little square houses with yellow lit windows and red roofs. I was so surprised, I didn't say anything, which was probably the most stringent criticism I could have said. But I think whenever you talk of Ronnie, you've got to bear in mind he had a very serious mental illness for all his adult life. I'm not completely sure. I think it was mooted that Ronnie would plead unfit to plead. And I think it got back to them that the prosecution would not accept that case. But you see, it was very political. And a classic example of another political case was the Yorkshire Ripper, Sutcliffe. The Home Office appointed 2 psychiatrists to assess him, and they found he was unfit to plead, but that didn't fit in with what the police wanted or the law wanted, because they don't want the police looking for a lunatic for 13 years. How come they can't catch a lunatic? They wanted a sophisticated, calculating person. And I think it would have been the same outlook with Ronnie. They didn't want a poor, sick man. They wanted the head of probably the most savage criminal gang ever to be known in England. Parkhurst was a really old prison. You look at Parkhurst and you could see that it had drained the youth out of so many young men. It was notorious because in 1969 there was a very bloody riot there. Well, I say riot, it was the warders who rioted. The prisoners, because of brutality, there was organised brutality there. The prison officers, when they got prisoners down the punishment block, would beat the bejesus out of people. The prisoners suddenly decided, rather than being done one at a time, let's have a sit down, which is what they did. And the judge at the trial said the Home Secretary should take a long, hard look at Parkhurst Prison, which was quite a stringent criticism. And because of that, they didn't want any more riots at Parkhurst. So we had a little bit of breathing space. Parkhurst Prison was the end of the line. All the prisoners they couldn't deal with, they sent to Parkhurst. A lot of very, very violent prisoners there. And there were 2 completely separate types of person there. There was the cons in the grey uniforms and the screws, the warders, in the blue uniforms. And never the 2 mixed. The screws just used to talk to the screws, and the cons just used to talk to the cons. There was still some brutality at Parkhurst when I got there, but not the heavy organised beatings like there was before. But Parkhurst was, not so much is now, but was then in 1975, just 5 years after the riot, as a very, very violent prison. And the thing that people don't realise is every year at the Prison Governors Conference, a governor, a deputy governor or an assistant governor will stand up and say, 1/3 of all my prisoners have got a severe mental illness. Am I running a prison and am I running a hospital? And Parkhurst, it was probably 70% had severe mental illnesses. That's why we were together in a firm. If necessary, if Mike Tyson came there, we'd look at Mike Tyson, and if he did something to us, we'd think, well, okay, this is like a bit of work. Let's do it like a bit of work. And that's what would be done. We'd solve our problem, and it'd send a message to all the other firms, leave them alone, they're quite heavy. We were quite a strong firm. We were all Londoners, probably 8 or 9 of us. And even amongst the Londoners, we were a strong firm. We didn't bother anyone, but we certainly wouldn't have anyone bother us. The Jocks, the Scots, they were quite a strong firm. The Irish were a strong firm. But we could look after ourselves. And it's about survival, because with all the dangerous people wandering about, the thing that puts them off is that they might get even more violence back than they'd put out themselves. We did think what would ever happen if Ronnie and Reggie came over to the main wing. We sat down and discussed it. We didn't see there being a problem. Reggie, he was pretty much like the rest of us. Ronnie's homosexuality, that wouldn't have bothered us, because he would have gone and did what he wanted to do, not in our cells, in his own cell. Well, there were a number of options. You could kill yourself, but my attitude was life was the only game in town. Some people try and get round the staff, grovel round the staff. You couldn't do that in Parkhurst. If you were seen talking to a prison officer, people would shun you. And the same the other round. If prison officers were seen being friendly with the prisoners, other prison officers wouldn't talk to them. There was no parole at Parkhurst. Nobody got parole, which was one of the protests that we had there. Sometimes, to let the steam off, you'd make a bit of homebrew, sugar, yeast, fruit, and get drunk. Absolutely falling down drunk. Not that we were alcoholics, but it broke the boredom. Other people painted. Some people sat down and watched TV. We ran a horse book. We took bets on the horses. We ran a card school. I studied on the Open University to try and keep my head together as much as I could, because I knew I was going to do a long time. I knew I was going to do at least 15 years and probably would do more than 20. And you look round for some sort of reference point. And I saw men who'd done 5 years and they were pretty much okay. 10 years, they were pretty much okay. 15 years, some of them were losing it. 20 years, they'd become severely institutionalised. So to me, a fate worse than death was to lose your mind in prison. That's what really focuses prisoners' minds. They don't want to go insane. Ronnie never had to experience the normal prison location. He went straight, after 5 years he was in Broadmoor, so very much a therapeutic environment. And he would have been on whatever medication that he wanted. With Reggie, there's the first 10 years, and every year after 10 years is like 3 or 4 years. That's what I found. My first 10 years went very quickly. I was escaping from this jail, riots there. But then you feel to yourself, this is a liberty to keep me this long. And I went up to 20 years. And every day after 20 years seems more and more of a liberty. They'd previously been in the security wing at Parkhurst. An absolute top security, state-of-the-art prison within a prison. 4 security categories, A, B, C and D. Parkhurst Security Wing was AA category. And they had my good friend Joe Martin, who, God rest him, he's dead now, who was in for his second murder. It was very boring. The same people would see each other day after day, the same warders would see each other. And there was very much an ebb and flow of existence, if you like. Nothing ever really happened there. All of a sudden, one day, a new prisoner was brought on the wing, a guy called Roy Grantham, a Liverpool guy. He was a thug, pure and simple. His philosophy would be, why should I try and convince somebody to do something when I can bully them and make them do it? And he was doing 10 years. Whilst he was waiting to go to trial, he hit a warder overhead with a bucket of porridge, which is phenomenally heavy, and showered the warder with the hot porridge, and he got more time on top. Then he hit a Scotsman with a hammer, and they put him in the security wing. He wasn't an escape risk, he was just a violent person, and they just thought the calm of the security wing would slow him down a bit. Well, because he was still on punishment, they didn't let him circulate with the other 10, 12 people. They put him in a cell, shut the door. Well, Ronnie is a very proper person who believes a man's got certain duties. So he went round, he collected some biscuits, some jam, some sugar, some tobacco, got the warder to open Grantham's door. Here, mate, here's some goodies for you. Oh, thanks very much. And I'll talk to you through your door. So the door was shut. Ronnie sat down on the doorstep, and I've never heard anyone do this. And he spent 3 or 4 weeks, nearly every single day, sitting on the doorstep, talking to Grantham through the door against the loneliness of solitary confinement. Now, other people knew why Ronnie would do it. Grantham wouldn't have picked up on it. He would have thought, well, I must really have arrived. I've done a screw, a warder, I've hit a Scotsman with a hammer, now I've got Ronnie Krays sitting on my doorstep talking to me. In the end, Grantham's punishment came to an end, and as far as Ronnie was concerned, that's it, he's done his duty. He certainly doesn't want him round him all the time. And also, he had a very restrictive life because he had a very, very bad mental condition. Not to put a point on it. He was certifiably insane. He'd been certified in civilian life, and eventually he gets certified again in Parkhurst. Some days he was so depressed, he'd lie in his cell with a light out for 3 days. The warders wouldn't go near and by him. The only people who would go and see him would be Reggie, his brother, and Joe Martin. So the last thing he'd want is a thicko like Grantham bursting in. But Roy thought, now I'm out, I'll mix with who I like, and kept going in his cell. So the next thing is, Ronnie said to him, Roy, if you don't mind, I'd just like my brother and Joe Martin to come in and see me. I'd be obliged if you didn't come in, but Grantham didn't take a blind bit of notice. So next thing, Ronnie's written a very polite note, Dear Roy, I'd be obliged if you wouldn't come in, and left it on his table. Suddenly, Ronnie and Reg are sitting there having a cup of tea. The door comes flying open. It's Grantham. Who do you think you are? I don't want to fucking speak to you anyway. Stick your fucking note. Threw it at him, walked out. He didn't realise it, but he just made a very, very serious mistake. 1 minute he's in bed dozing, the next minute he's got Ronnie sitting on his chest, slashing his face, Reggie sitting on his legs, slashing his stomach, Neil Addison stabbing him with this harpoon or spear he's made, screams and shouts fill the air. Well, woke Joe Martin up. Joe ran in and could see what was happening, and he told me, he said, Norman, they'd all 3 completely lost it. He said, especially Ronnie, he was literally like a raving lunatic. He said, I knew they were going to kill him. So Joe grabbed hold of Adamson and threw him bodily out the cell, got hold of Reg, said, Reg, we got to stop Ronnie, he's going to kill him. They got hold of Ronnie and calmed him down, and they took him out the cell. Now, needless to say, the warders were nowhere near or by. They were standing well back. They weren't going in. But Joe Martin told me afterwards, he said, Norman, I looked at Grantham and he looked like a butcher's meat. He said, I thought they'd actually killed him. But in fact, he only had superficial wounds because they weren't knives, they were broken bottles. And they took Ronnie and Reggie out the wing. They're really looking at a murder charge, attempted murder charge. But prisons like to consume their own smoke. He went in front of visiting magistrates. They couldn't lose any remission. I think they did a bit of punishment. And then Dr. Cooper took them onto C Wing. And I think they hadn't been on C Wing long when I arrived in the prison. In many ways, Reggie was a victim of Ronnie. Ronnie would kick things off and Reggie would get dragged in with them. Cooper tried to keep them together as long as he possibly could, but even he had to admit the inevitable, and they certified Ron and sent him away to Broadmoor prison. Ronnie Kray was a long-term mental patient. He'd been in a civilian mental institution. And in Parkhurst, you couldn't have cocaine or heroin or anything like that, but you can certainly have Valium and Largactil and all the other stuff. And they did it because it controlled people. It's a chapter in my book. You'd see every morning, dinner time, tea time, a queue form. And people go forward and ask for their particular psychotropic drugs. And then they'd amble about, beast-like, through their daily round to get through it. Ronnie, as I understood it, was on very heavy medication. It was said that a guy who was a friend of mine, had his medication by mistake. It took him 3 days to recover. He was unconscious for 2 days and came round on the 3rd day. Ronnie and Reggie Kray had a reputation of being people best left alone. There was a lot of people who didn't want all the notoriety, especially with Ronnie. You had to be very, very careful what you said to him. But a man best left alone, because we can all forget and we can all say things that we think are humorous and funny, and you've really, really upset the man. With Reg, he pretty much had people's respect. He held his head up. He did his time like a man, as best you can do your time over 30 years. But again, he would keep people at arm's length. Otherwise, you'd have a constant stream of mugs coming in and out of his cell driving him mad. 2 types of people would idolise Ronnie and Reggie. Very young prisoners and complete mugs. Very young people because they didn't know enough to realise you just put people off if you're on them all the time. You're either accepted by them or you're not accepted by them. And complete mugs because mugs can only get a bit of respect, not from what they do, but from other people they know. But by being mugs, most notorious people, most sensible criminals, won't have anything to do with them. I only really saw Ronnie and Reggie Kray in Parkhurst. Because of who they are and their notoriety, a lot of people did defer to them. Especially a lot of the staff would defer to them. They weren't disruptive in any way other than the attack on Grantham. They weren't yes men by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't see them when they were all together on a big wing, because they weren't on a big wing. At this time, they were on a little Parkhurst security wing, 12 people, C wing. I did see Charlie Kray coming to Albany, and he had several mugs around him, because he wasn't at all like Ronnie and Reggie Kray. He wanted to get out of prison. He was a good boy. He was behaving himself, trying very hard to get out of prison. Did they have any control? Ronnie got moved to Broadmoor, so it was just Reggie on his own. And Reggie, from what I could gather from Joe Martin, because Joe's used to spend a lot of time. He'd keep to a relatively small group of people. The last thing he wanted was a Kray gang in prison. There were a lot of people who looked up to him. A lot of it was to do with the respect a man's due if he's doing 30 years. If a man's doing 30 years, if a man's doing 20 years, he deserves a bit of respect. Don't give him a hard time. Don't make things any worse for him. And if you can help him, then do. But the terrible thing with Reggie was this. His 30 years wasn't a maximum, and he would have realised that he wasn't going to get out. So in many ways, they tortured Reggie to death. That's why I felt so very, very sorry for Reggie. There's no way you can do 30 years. By the time they brought in the new tariff system back in 1984, I knew, well, I was given a tariff of 20 years, but I'd already done 14 years. And if you can do 14 years, you can do the other 6. But the only trouble is it isn't a minimum tariff. Well, it is a minimum tariff, but it isn't set in concrete. And I ended up doing 24. But once you've done 21, 22, you can do 23, 24, especially by this time I'm in an open prison. An open prison was a commitment to release, so I knew I was coming home. Well, you see, there's always two people when you got somebody famous. There's how they were before they were famous and how they were after they were famous. And sometimes the two are miles and miles apart. A lot of people didn't like what was done to Frank Mitchell. Jack the Hat was a violent man, and when he got killed, people say, well, it goes with the territory. George Cornell, another very violent man, again, went with the territory. A lot of people thought the murder of Frank Mitchell was a liberty. Frank Mitchell was the Hulk before the Hulk was ever invented. Big, massive guy, slightly childish, always fighting with the warders. Well, with the warders, when they jump on you, they jump 7, 8-handed. You got no chance. Not with Frank. He'd shake them off like dogs shaking rats off. And he'd always join in. If he saw a warder having a go at another prisoner, he'd join in. And I was only young at the time. I think I was my first sentence. I was 18, 19 years of age. And people idolised the man. Ronnie and Reggie got him out to put pressure on the Home Office because he was doing a life sentence and he hadn't killed anyone. Supposedly he'd uttered threats against their family and they killed him like a dog. Literally like a dog. He went to get in the back of the van and he was shot in the back of the head, and by all accounts a phone call was made, the dog is dead. Also, there aren't any laws in the underworld. And the underworld is a word I hate to use. It's a stupid word. But you don't rob your own. And yet Ronnie and Reggie, when they heard people had hijacked a lorry or taken this, that and the other, they'd get hold of them, torture them and take their money off them, take the goods off of them. So that's where I mean they took some liberties. Ronnie. Basically, he was mad. Completely mad. Well, I mean, a classic example. I mean, I didn't personally witness it, but I was told by the firm. Ronnie, it was their West End club, and Ronnie would always stand just in the entrance. And as people come in, Ronnie would say, good evening, how are you, so-and-so. And one night this guy come in, let's call him George, and Ronnie said, hello, George, how are you? And he went, okay, Ron, putting on a bit of weight, mate. Now, that isn't the worst thing in the world you can say to someone, but it was the wrong person to say it to, because Ronnie didn't say anything, he didn't get excited, he just turned round, he walked up to Reg, that slag, you know what he said? We can't have him taking the piss, we've got to do something about it. So they gradually emptied the club. The guy who did it standing up in the bar having a drink. Suddenly the firm, such as they were, grabbed hold of him Ronnie had a big cutthroat razor, and just as deliberately as any surgeon would wield a scalpel, sliced him down both cheeks. And I believe that at the time they afterwards, in very black humour, they nicknamed the guy Tramlines, just like the tram lines running along the street. But, I mean, if you look at the history of Ronnie, some terrible, terrible acts of violence he did. So have I, but not in anything like the amount that Ronnie did. Reggie, when you got Reggie on his own, he was pretty much like all the rest of the London criminals. Very much down to earth, without the heavy duty mental illness that was so obvious in Ronnie. I don't think Ronnie ever did. Ronnie, once he was in, if he'd have been found unfit to plead at his trial, which he should have been, he was a sick man, a very, very sick man, and they made a criminal out of a sick man. He would probably have been released. Certainly after about 20 years. I mean, he died after 20 years. Poor old Reggie, he did 30 years and died. And I think in the latter years it affected his mind. He didn't know what he had to do to get out, but you see, in some ways they were their own worst enemies. By now there'd been films made, documentaries made, books written, and what the Home Office, I suppose, were very much worried about was them releasing Reggie, and next thing you know he's on Panorama, or there's another film, or this, that and the other. So it would have always been very difficult to let him out. I think people who've been convicted of very serious, very notorious crimes do get people contact them. Even now, with my website, I have quite a lot of people write to me and they want to become friends with me and this, that and the other. So the more notorious people are, the more people want to become friends with them. And that would be especially so with Ronnie and Reggie Kray. So there is a dynamic when notorious people come to a jail, but prison is a great leveller. I used to behave in exactly the same way every wing I walked on. You walk in, you don't talk to people. If there's one or two people you know, you better be sure that they're good, strong people. Maybe you talk to them. And you send a message that if anyone fucks with you, there's going to be some very, very serious trouble. Because a lot of big reputations have absolutely disappeared overnight, where somebody who thought they were a tough guy or was a notorious guy, all paper talk, and they said something to somebody and someone's punched them in the face and put them on their arse, and that's the beginning of a long slippery slope to oblivion and to becoming a laughingstock. When I was visiting Joe Martin in Maidstone prison, in the visiting room was Reggie. He'd have a visit, and he'd always come over and shake my hand, ask me how I was, because in my books, I mean, the story about them attacking Grantham is in my Parkhurst Tales books. And if they were critical, and some of them were, he didn't say a word about it because he knew that it was pretty objective. But he had very busy visits. Other people, you're only allowed 3 people on a visit. He'd have 3, they'd go out, another 3 come in, another 3. It'd become like a celebrity. I think gangster chic is the term they use. The 90s were strange times. Strange insofar as a lot of elderly criminals, notorious criminals, were finishing their long sentences. Long sentences either for murder, armed robbery, and other serious crimes. And to come out at 60, 55 years of age, you don't really want to be jumping over bank counters, robbing banks, robbing security vans. You haven't really got the context to smuggle in half a ton of cocaine from Colombia. And so, bearing in mind you've never ever been a worker, they didn't know what to do with themselves. They could see poverty staring them in the face. But all of a sudden, there were certain TV producers, film producers, that could see the kernel of a story. And the criminals picked up on it very, very quickly. Tony Lambriano, God rest him, he's dead now, very funny man. I went on a shoot once and he had them all eating out of his hand. The producer, Tony, what? And he said to me, Norman, I've got these people. These are dead easy. But there's only so many stories you can tell. And he said to me, Norman, this is it. This is gangster chic. And suddenly you're talking about somebody as if they're the male version of Mother Teresa, when they're not. But I never did believe in gangster chic. I believe you've got to tell it as it is. I think it's all about fame. Everybody nowadays, so they say, gets their 15 minutes of fame. It surprises me in America. Serial killers who killed 10, 15, 20 women, and yet lots of people write in and want to become friendly with them. I really think it is they want to try and become notorious by becoming friendly with somebody who's notorious. The original Krays and the Krays brand, two very, very different things. You could be forgiven for thinking the brand Krays were people who went around doing good acts and helping people. Well, maybe they did when they were in prison, but they didn't do that when they were out. For those people who turn around and say the Krays have left a legacy, I can't see it. An interesting story told to me by one of the firm. They said that Ronnie and Reggie were invited out to America. This was a time when the American mob were trying to get gambling rights in England because they were going to put gambling in England. So Ronnie and Reggie go out to New York, and it was said that they were guests of the Brunos, Angelo Bruno family. And you could see what was that they had in mind, the Americans, to explain to their English cousins how you go about things. So Bruno was saying to Ronnie and Reggie, they're in a big restaurant, very nice restaurant. And they said to Ronnie and Reggie, see this tablecloth? Yeah, tablecloth, yeah. All the tablecloths, all the linen in all the hotels have to be laundered in our laundry. Do you see these flowers on the mantelpiece over there? They all have to be bought from our florists. That's the future of organised crime. And never, ever, ever kill anyone yourself. Get somebody else to do it. What did he do, Ronnie? He came straight back to London. He walked in the Blind Beggars and he shot George Cornell stone dead in front of people in the pub. So they didn't learn that lesson very well, did they? One thing you can say about the three brothers, as criminals, they were spectacularly unsuccessful. Charlie died in prison. Ronnie spent 20 years, died in Broadmoor Hospital. Reggie, 30 years, they put him in a hospice. He had weeks to live. He died after 30 years in prison. Not a criminal success story.
I spent the best part of 37 years with nearly going to every jail in the country out of the last 40 years and being out now 3 years, the longest I've been out, and now proud to say that I am crime-free.
This is Samson Misra, better known inside as Yammy B, a former criminal. He spent most of his life behind bars.
I started out on my institutional journey about 1981, where I stabbed my abuser in the children's home and went to prison, young prison, very, very early.
This is Matt from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're hearing about his experiences. From kids' homes and early burglaries to prison jungle work and saving the life of a female prison probation officer.
They used to call me Jammy Sammy. So then When I got in deeply into the prison stuff, and the name Yammy comes from jammy, yammy, meaning it's a slang yamming, like you're yamming food. But really, what they were really talking about was me yamming everybody else's drugs. And the B stood for the bumblebee, because I was a bit of a stinger. Like I'd pull tricks on people, and it's like being stung by a bumblebee.
Before the nicknames and the years behind bars, Yammy's life started in a broken home in East London. And it wasn't long before he ended up bouncing from children's homes to Borstal.
It wasn't a very happy household with mum and dad. My dad used to hit my mum. I was a mummy's boy and always used to protect her. And then my dad had a stroke. My mum took an overdose. There was no one to look after me and my sisters. So we ended up in the care of Westminster. And I was about 11 years old. From being at home and the shock of moving into a children's home, I didn't really take to it too well. I suffered at the hands of an abuser while I was there. And a year or so in, flipped out one day after reporting it. No one believed me, nothing was done about it. I didn't like to go to school during this period, or used to try because I couldn't stop crying. And then one morning he said, "You've got to go to school." I said, "No, I'm not going." He picked me up and he threw me outside the balcony and shut the door. And the other school kids that were going to school with me started laughing. So I went into my bag, I pulled out the geometry set, I got a compass out that I used to draw circles with, and I was still only about 4 foot. I was very underdeveloped. I was like 11 years old, but I looked about 4. So I pressed the doorbell, and this 6'2" giant answered it like he was going to come out. But I rushed into him and stabbed him multiple times with the compass. But I kind of felt exhilarated, and the adrenaline in me was really high that I found a way to fight back through all the stuff that I was suffering from during that stay in the children's home. And I got on the bus, and I remember sitting with the kids and they were going, "Sammy, you all right?" And I was happy kind of thing. But when I got to school, the police turned up and come and took me from the school. I appeared in court. The social worker told me to plead guilty, so I pleaded guilty, and they put me in Stamford House, a young boys' prison. It was run different, them institutions back then. They used to call you out in assembly, and if you messed about at night and the nightman put it in the book, they'd call you to the front, and you'll go there, and you'll drop something on the floor. When you go to pick it up, he'll slap you in the face, and then the whole assembly room would start laughing at you. It was really like that back in the day. Couldn't really get away with doing all that now. I spent 10 months at St Thomas More, an approved school for bad boys and delinquents and boys that haven't, came from broken homes. I see a few of them today who've come through the other end as well, but a lot don't make it, I'm afraid. They stay emotionally disturbed forever. But while I was there, for those 10 months, the last month, because I couldn't get no home leaves, I ran away. But it's very difficult to run away in Horsham, Sussex, because the train station is miles away. And I tried it before, but you run out in your pajamas at night, but they find out and you get nicked before you get to the police station. You have to know the route and everything. But on the final go, I made it. I got there in the morning, or I got a lift, I think, to the station and got on the train. And then I stayed with one of those early friends who were habitually involved in burgling rich premises. I stayed at their house for about 3 or 4 weeks, but of course we were stealing and burgling, sadly, every day. And one of them got arrested, called me and my other friend's name, and I coughed up to about 16 burglaries when they asked me to, and I ended up in detention centre, which was a short, sharp shock. When I was in the juvenile court, the laid bench of 2 ladies and a man, they said to me, "Look, Samson, we want you to go to another home further away. We don't want you to go to detention centre. We don't think it's going to be any good for you." And I turned around and said to them all, I said, "No." I said, "I don't want to go back to no home. I want to go to detention centre." Can you believe that? I thought it would make me hard, but I wanted to be able to tell people that I'd done the short, sharp shock, and I want you to go through it. And as soon as you get off the bus, the officers are waiting there. And it's a different kind of game now. And I'm standing there, and they said, "Right, stand there. I'm not your mother. I'm not your social worker. I'm an effing prison officer, a screw. And I'm here to screw you right down to the ground." He goes, "What's your name?" I went, "Sammy." Slap. "Surname," and say, "Sir." Boom. And then you get your kit, you go for reception. And I was so small, I couldn't really carry the blanket and all that. And he said, right, now run down to that corridor and go down here and get something to eat. But as you run down the corridor, it says no running. So when you get down to the other end, there's another one waiting. He says, can't you read? Slap again.
Yammy's time in children's homes, approved school and detention centres came to an end. But he was far from reformed.
I went back to my mum and dad's after that detention centre because obviously my care order had run out. But when I went back to my mum and dad's, it was the first time I felt actually free since I was 10. And I kind of liked being back with my mum, but it always held that house the night of when we went into care and everybody was crying and the social services were trying to pull us to the car and all the neighbours was out. So it held like deep, sad memories for me anyway. But only this time now, I'm entrenched in crime and burgling. So for about 3 months, I meet my first love, my first ever relationship. Didn't really last long because I got arrested in St. Albans in a Boy Scout uniform where somebody was getting me to knock on doors with a bucket and sponge, pretending to ask for odd jobs. And if they didn't answer, my older friend would go in and burgle it, or I'd go in there with him. So I ended up going to St. Albans Crown Court and I ended up getting 4 years for 5 burglaries by Justice Drake. And the social worker was in court. She stood up in the box, the dock. The justice was saying, yes, well, you know, what do you think? She goes, well, we've run out of options for him. He's immature. He's got a bone structure of a 10-year-old and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And Justice Drake, he turned around and said, you may be immature, but you are one of the maturest burglars I have ever seen. My sister was in the gallery upstairs crying. I looked behind me and I was crying as well. So I had to get in a van with 2 older guys that got less time than me for worse crimes, who were habitual criminals who've been through the system already. I had to get in the bus with them and they sent me to the adult jail at 16, 17 years old to Brixton, HMP, for a couple of weeks before they could transfer me to HMP Chelmsford, which was a miniature Wandsworth, really, very serious place. I remember I used to come down for breakfast in the morning and the staff used to take the piss out of me and say, oh, do you want us to phone your mum? I came out of Aylesbury in 1985. I had another girlfriend, I think, for a short period. I was back at home with mum and dad and started burgling with older guys that I met from prison now as well, where we was going out every day. And then around about late 1985, after being out about 4 months, got a big haul of diamonds from down in Regent's Park, got away with it and got arrested and was back in custody for something else. I left fingerprints somewhere, then I went to court, Knightsbridge Crown Court, and a judge let me out to go to a probation course. He said he'd done too much custody for a young boy and let me out, right? Wasn't out long again, broke that order and ended up with another 3 or 4 in 1985, 1986.
Whilst in prison, Yammy saved the life of a prison parole officer and received the royal warrant from Queen Elizabeth II.
I was in Wandsworth Jail in 1989. My son's mother was pregnant and she just had the baby and she was bringing him up every week. But then in the early days of Wandsworth, they used to put slips under the door the night before to tell you that you're getting moved to another prison without much warning. I got the notice in the door, but I got 2 days notice. They're saying you're going to the Isle of Wight in 2 days' time. But obviously I'm panicking because I'm thinking I'm not going to get no visits and I'm not going to see the newborn baby, my son, too regularly because it's too far for her to travel. So I realised if I could get down and see the probation officer and tell her my predicament. So I'm thinking I would tell her that I won't be able to see my son and it's going to really ruin my family ties. Can you keep me here and get me to a prison not so far? You know, I was going to try that trick that many used back then with chaplains and probations, and sometimes it worked. So that morning, I went on exercise. You go around the centre, you come off your wing to go through another wing to get onto the exercise yard. So when I was coming in, instead of going back to my cell, because you go at 9 in the morning, 10 o'clock, you exercise an hour, full hour. You come back, single file, you go straight to your doors and they bang you up. And the staff officers go for their tea break. But I was thinking, hold on, if I go down, come come off the exercise yard, I'll go down, there's 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s landing. I was on the 3s landing, but I went down onto the 1s landing, went to the toilets that are in the recesses where you can do number 1s, but obviously they weren't in the cells. So I sat down on the toilet as exercise was banging up, and I put my feet up against the door so that I'm expecting the prison officers to look under the door of the toilet, and if they don't see feet, they won't think that anybody is in there. Then I heard everyone banging up, and then it all went quiet and peaceful. So then I knew that was my time. So I crept up onto the 2s. There was a line of about 5 men. The probation officer's that way. The prison office and tea room is that way. And the unit of the office where the staff normally are in, if they're not on breaks, here. So the queue's there, but they're standing like that in single file, waiting to go in and see the probation officer there. So I got to the back of the queue, but I haven't made an application. So I thought, well, let me try and push to the front and push the door open. So I pushed to the front to try and get there and open the door and just have a quick word with her. But when I opened the door, there was a man on top of her with a knife. So my first thought was that I don't like this kind of thing. Kind of reminded me of my mum and dad when I was little. So I started moving towards him in slow motion, ended up fighting with him, wrestling with him. She ran out the room screaming. The bell got pressed. About 200 prison officers came running onto the wing, into the room, and pulled me off. And then I felt my arms being wrapped up. Then I saw him getting wrapped up. They don't really know what's happened because the lady is in shock and ain't explaining it well. So they took him to the block. I could hear him screaming, and then they're just about to bend me up. I'm going, Gov, I ain't done nothing. She was over there with 3 officers. It was all the uniforms was around. And then they started to bend my hands, grab my neck, started to let me walk and everything. And just as I was walking past her, she came running over. I said, no, don't take him. It's not him. So then they left me on the wall with the prison staff, and I was being held there, and I was looking like that. I was kind of sad. I was thinking, this is just my luck, this is. And then a senior officer came over and said, let him go. And then he walks me up to myself. He goes, I'll tell you what I'm saying. I'm saying that you're a hero. That's what he said to me, Mr. Baker.
Inside, violence had its own economy, and hits could be very lucrative.
So in the early days, the older lot, they didn't really like bullies, and they would protect you. You wouldn't really be able to rob anybody in prison like the way that it is now, and from the way it changed in the 90s, because a lot of the old school, they didn't see that as, the right thing to be done. And then a hit or contract could be put out on you, and you will get severely hurt. What they call a hit is a contract. Like a hitman, you've seen them on the telly, on the outside, some men shoot people for other people for money motivation and getting thrills out of it also. But in prison, it runs similar, but the characters that do them on the outside are not necessarily the ones that do it on the inside. It's more the addicts, more the ones that are in need that day. Will you do that for me? Can you throw the hot fat over him or throw sugar and water over him? These are the kind of things that happen in those environments where rivals are falling out with each other. So a man will come to me, I'll give you this, 3 or 4, £50 worth of this or £100 worth of this drug. If you get somebody or you do it, you can throw hot water, sugar over him, I'll give you that. If you throw hot cooking oil over him, I'll give you that. And if you stab him or you do that or seriously harm him or whatever the level of harm that the seller who wants the hit done and the contract by way of violence done, he will pay you accordingly to the damage that he wants done. So the worse the harm, the more you get paid.
Drugs have always been part of prison life, something Yammy would come to understand only too well.
In the early days of the 80s, when I first went to adult prison, it was more of a case of a bit of cannabis, a bit of puff, very quietly done, where you go and meet a man or you're getting half-ounce tobacco deals for probably 2 joints and that kind of stuff. Or, the more burn you got, the more cannabis you can buy. But, it puts you to sleep. It's done quietly. It smells a bit more. But the staff never seemed to be that bothered about it. So when heroin came, there's a new breed of criminals, of course, coming in. It was frowned upon in the early days of my institutional stays, but in the 90s, loads of men were doing it, and there was a lot of men who had spiraled out of control, like me. For that generation, if there's 4 or 5 drug dealers on a wing, then, you know, you got more chances. You can go to this one if you don't get on with that one. If you owe that person, but you don't pay him, and you end up running up debts all over the place. Some people run off when they can't pay the debts. I would always stay and take my chances of, okay, I can't pay you money, but I'll do you a favor when you want me to, when something comes up. So I'd always get involved and in between other people's enemies with each other. And there was a lot of men now, like me, I was noticing, who was doing similar things to me. And sometimes you end up smoking drugs together with that person, or you all end up going halves with each other to get it. But of course, with heroin and smoking it, you develop a habit and a physical dependency. So if a job or a hit or a contract or anything, by doing somebody a favour so you can get it, the idea will be more appealing.
Yammy spent time in Category A prisons, places reserved for some of the most dangerous men in Britain.
All dispersal, Category A's, are round about the same, surrounded by violent killers. Obviously there's a protection wing for the rapists and the child killers and that kind of stuff. The different type of inmates from all other prisoners are remarkably different, because you know that most men on those landings, in those Category A's, are either seriously violent or like armed robbers, murderers, men, I don't know, it's just men that have been on the front page of the newspapers. In the Category A's, the violence, most of the time, the inmate will end up as being attacked or comes off worse in a battle with another inmate. You end up going outside hospital because the kind of injuries that happen in there. So I always say when 2 killers fight, no one wins really, because it's who's going to do the most damage, because they don't want you lying around afterwards. So they're going to try and harm you severely. You can always use the sugar and water tactic, because, you know, if you scold somebody with that, he's going to scream, the bell's going to go, or he's going to be harmed, he's going to get moved for his own safety. So you live to see another day with not going to be able to be attacked by the person you've injured unless you go to another Category A after that, where you bump into that person who's not going to forget what you did to them in that jail. In fact, I've seen other men who have committed acts of violence in those Category A's turn up at another Category A, and those that he's harmed are in that Cat A at that time, and as soon as he steps through the door, steps on that exercise yard, they all start pelting towards him, or he gets attacked straight away. Most of the time he's meant to be expecting it, because the Cat A's, it's only, when you're a Category A, you can only go around the 4 or 5 jails. So if you have too many incidents, you end up going around them 2, 3 times. But the kind of violence, I saw a prison officer get thrown hot fat over him, and the man ended up staying in the block forever for that, and he got extra charges and he got sentenced. I've seen men stabbed to death in the Category A's.
The whole prison scene changed when gangs took over.
In the old days, coming through the system, there was no such thing as gang culture. You used to go into the recess and have a one-on-one fisticuff fight, and the winner, you shake hands afterwards, or you lose, or people would be in there saying, no one join in, it's not one of those ones. But now the system has completely changed. Gangs off the streets, from Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, London, from all sides of every city. You know, they've got names of their gangs, they get long sentences, their friends come, their enemies from rival gangs come, and then, you know, it depends who's got the biggest gang, but there's no stopping. If like there's 5 members of a gang now and one of their rivals turn up, those 5 will come sprinting on the yard now and, you know, hack you and stab you to death. Some don't like to turn up because they know that they're going to be outnumbered in that jail. Sometimes the authorities, if you've played up in one Category A, they will send you to another jail where all your enemies are, and you'll be in serious, serious trouble. In the recent times, I suppose I was part of all gangs. I was joining all of them because they all had the drugs and everything. So, but I was everyone's bestie, if you get what I mean. So I was in a mix with the London, the Liverpool, with the Manchester, with the Birminghams, lot. But when they fought each other, I wouldn't get involved. But I would be in their gangs for other things, away from what's happening in their own cities. I was a bit smart to not get involved, because I know if you start doing things for one gang against another, then you know you've got to face that other gang as well. The chances of getting hurt are really, really high, but it's a dangerous game.
After decades inside, Yammy developed a sixth sense for his fellow inmates.
So in the category A's, right, everyone has the potential to be dangerous. They got the principle of mad, bad and sad. You know, the psychologists say, you know, they describe me as being sad because there was bits of loving in there, but I know the difference between what I'm doing and some bits of right and wrong and the accepting of your part in certain things. But there's some inmates on normal location that you quite clearly see they shouldn't be on the wing. They're very, very dangerous, but they're mentally disturbed. But then you've got the evil ones, and I seem to have a sixth sense of being able to identify these men over the long periods of incarcerated, from the YPs, Vanage and Kenneth Erskine, who became serial killers amongst others as well, that I saw in latter stages on other sentences as well. But then in the category A's, I always seem to be able to pick up on the real evil ones just by their presence, but they're not that mentally unwell, if you get what I mean. They're just ball evil.
After spending nearly 4 decades in and out of some of the country's toughest high-security prisons, Yammy's experiences prove that it's never too late to turn your life around.
When I first went into adult prison, after the young boys' prisons, it was very daunting. Yeah, the truth is that I spent 37 years in most jails around the country out of the last 40 years, and now, proud to say that I am crime-free.
My charge was conspiracy to import Class A drugs.
In 2015, the security at London Heathrow Airport was breached by a small group of corrupt baggage handlers. Together with a network of airport outsiders, they managed to smuggle £32 million of cocaine from Brazil to Heathrow's Terminal 5. 32-year-old Londoner Leiona Townsend-Bartley was part of the network. In 2018, she was sentenced to 6 years in prison and sent to HMP Bronzefield.
Don't be in the prison and act like you and officers are friends. You're never going to be friends. You know, they are officers and you are a prisoner, that's it.
This is Matt from Underworld Uncut, and this week we're going inside HMP Bronzefield with ex-offender Leiona. We'll find out what life is really like inside Europe's largest female prison.
I was a mental health support worker. I worked for an organisation that dealt with high-risk mental health in a hostel. So I had a caseload of clients that I used to manage, and I loved my job. I spent maybe 7-8 months there before I found out I was pregnant. And once I got pregnant and then I had my maternity leave, I just never returned back after that. My daughter was actually born early as well. She was 7 weeks early. So she was 3 pounds 10 in weight. Premature. Spent 9 days in ICU, which is the Children's Intensive Care Unit, and then I brought her home. I think at the time I was quite vulnerable due to the news of my daughter. I didn't have the best relationship with her father at the time. I feel like that weighed a lot of pressure on me, and I kind of turned to others for support. I feel like the people that I turned to maybe used that opportunity to take advantage of my situation and kind of use it and manipulate me a little bit. And within a year, I was then sent to prison. So my crime was a conspiracy to import Class A drugs. I was apparently a part of a 15-month conspiracy that the police, the NCA, was involved in, had control of, which I had nothing to do with, barring maybe I think 2 days, they said, of communication, which was basically around the individual that I was being supported by at the time. And it was literally like, can you send this message? Can you make this call? And I didn't actually seem to have a problem with doing that at the time. So it was quite innocent in my eyes, and that's the reason why I was sent to prison. My charge was conspiracy to import Class A drugs. However, my initial charge was just an evasion of prohibition, which meant that I knew that I knew the crime was happening and I didn't inform the police. My sentence was 6 years. And the judge actually said on sentencing that he can see that I was being manipulated throughout the case, like through the notes and stuff. And he knows that I love my daughter and I'm gonna miss her and she's gonna miss me. But you know, because of the severity of the case, I have to be given a custodial sentence. And it was like, okay, you know, slowly start to understand what's happening, Leiona, understand your contribution, no matter how small, and understand the consequences for that because they're not gonna go away. So I spent 3 years in custody between 2018 and 2021. So because the case involved so many people, I was never on my own. So my half of the trial was 7 members of the public that I didn't know, barring the one individual. And so there was another lady attached to my case. So when we got found guilty together in the dock, I found myself supporting her reaction and the way she was behaving as opposed to attaching myself to what was going on. So that was how it went in the beginning. And then we was sent to Bronzefield in a van. I think we spent maybe 3 or 4 hours downstairs in the cells. You know, there was a lot of crying going on. There was a lot of stuff happening. And all I could think about was like, oh my God, this girl, like, she's not gonna cope. And when I think back now, I'm just like, what about yourself? But I didn't have time to think about that. It was like, I'm okay. I must be okay because I haven't had a breakdown. I haven't, you know, not adjusted myself to what's happening. I'm quite present. So anyway, so we've got to the prison quite late in the night, and we almost didn't get in because once you get to a prison after a certain time, the gate's closed and that's the last roll check's done and no one else is allowed in. So we would have ended up having to spend the night in the police station until the morning if the driver hadn't got there in time. Luckily, we had quite a nice driver. He was quite bubbly, you know, so he was like, you know what, I'm going to make sure I get you there because if I don't, I know what's going to happen, you know. And it affected his work because he would have had to come back at some point and yeah, whatever. So so we got there in the evening and I was put on the wing at night, so everyone was already locked in. I didn't see anyone until the morning. I think that kind of worked for me. I don't know how I would have reacted if I just walked into a prison in the middle of the day into the chaos I woke up to the next morning, to be honest. I think I was quite numb. I think there was so much other stuff going on. I think I was still trying to catch up with the feelings of having a baby early, catch up with the feelings of my house burning down. My house caught fire by the sun and burnt down. Catch up with the feelings of being on bail for so long and having to sign at a police station every day between 9 and 5 for like 8, 9 months. So by the time I got sentenced or remanded, there wasn't really enough time to think about it. So it took about 3 months before I actually cried for the first time with the realisation of what had happened and where I was and the fact that I wasn't going home. When I woke up the following morning, as I said to you, it was brought in late at night. So I was brought to the wing like 11 o'clock in the evening. So I think it was like 7:45 that they unlocked the doors. And that was my first ever experience of prison life. I remember I had nothing other than the laundry bag that they sent with me. So now I've got to go out and get breakfast. I've got to go and interact with people. And due to having substances in my system, according to the medics, the medical team, I had diazepam and heroin in my system. Never used those drugs in my life. However, I did previously smoke marijuana. So because of that, I was put onto a house block that houses women that are addictions, like people that are methadone, people that are on prescribed drugs as well. So I was put onto that wing based on that. So in men's prisons you have, I believe, A-CAT, B-CAT, C-CAT, D-CAT jails. However, in women's prisons you aren't categorised. You have literally open prisoners or closed prisoners, which then means that every category of offender is mixed together. So a shoplifter will be mixed with a child killer, for example, until they're either sentenced or removed from the prison and sent somewhere else. But other than that, they are actually mixed together on a daily basis. Some prisons may have categorised wings, like Bronzefield, because Bronzefield is a double A-CAT prison, which is quite strange because it's a remand prison. So you can't have tins. Like Downview is a sentence prison, right? So Downview, I can order things like KAs, KA canned drinks and corned beef and tuna, I can order that on my canteen. And I've been shipped back to Bronzefield, and those things have been removed from my property because I'm now in a double ACAT jail, which is, they're saying is like the most severe prisoners. But I'm like, but this is a remand prison. You know, someone that might have just shoplifted or, I don't know, something silly could get remanded for a short period of time until they go back to court, and this is what they can be confronted with. You know, that mixture of offenders. Like, I remember when I first went to prison, there was ex-sex offenders on my wing, you know, and you don't know that they are. How do you know? There's no board that says, you know, this person's coming. If you don't know, you can't go around and ask every single prisoner, you know, what have you done, what have you done, what have you done, what have you done? Do you know what I mean? You have to kind of navigate, you have to talk to people, the right people, you have to kind of know how to pick up the algorithms of the prison. In Bronzefield, you have 4 house blocks. I know possibly they were starting at 5, which was an open wing, but there are 4 main house blocks. House block 1 would house the women that have addicted to drugs like crack cocaine, heroin, alcoholics, and quite a lot of shoplifters, which also carries a lot of addiction. And then you have house block 2, which houses a lot of the women that came in from police stations, from courts, and were just directly remanded, and that's where they would be housed. It's like an induction wing. And then you have house block 3, which is houses more settled prisoners, maybe people that have complex needs and they can't actually be transferred to another prison, so they actually end up doing the majority of their prison in Bronzefield. All these house blocks are then made up of 4 wings on each house block, which are all connected. The wings eat together, but everyone associates in the evenings together. I was first housed on house block 1 due to substances that were found in my system. So I was housed with the people that had the people that were addicts and that were on prescribed medication, methadone and things like that. I spent, I think, maybe 4 days on there, and then I found an officer that I asked to move me because I was just like, I just don't belong here. And he moved me straight to house block 3, so I didn't have to go into the induction wing. I'd already been in the prison over that induction time. So I don't think it made sense to put me there anyway, but yeah, I got kind of like a free pass, which helped me because I was on a wing with people that have been in prison for quite a long time. So they taught me a lot about what I needed to know to survive and just to be able to get through day to day, really. Bronzefield is quite a erratic prison, I would describe. So it's normally quite noisy. Especially if you're living on house block 2, it's again, women have just come in, they're not used to being locked in. So there's a lot of crying, a lot of banging on doors, a lot of stuff, people getting triggered by little things officers are doing, like closing your hatch at night. Women will go on and start banging for hours and hours throughout the night. So I did servery. Did the servery and the laundry and the wing cleaning. So with the servery, you get let out at like 6:30 in the morning. So you can do breakfast, which is just eggs and toast, between 7 and 8. 8:45 is movement. Everyone who's got work goes to work, who doesn't gets locked in their cell until lunchtime. And then lunchtime is about 12:30 maybe. Everyone comes back from their work, everyone has lunch, then we get locked in for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then there's normally visits within that time, so people might get unlocked at 2 o'clock for a visit. And then at 2:15 or 2:30, you get unlocked for movement again in the afternoon. You go to work till maybe like 4:30. Come back for dinner. Dinner will be served, and then you have from 4:30 till maybe 6:45 to, you know, shower, socialise, go out for exercise, all that good stuff. You know, order your canteen on the pod and credit and stuff like that. And that's just a typical normal day in Bronzefield, in a nutshell, without all the drama attached. There was drama every day. One person kicks off, the whole wing's getting locked down. That was every day. You know, people will kick off about the silliest little things, you know, not getting let out now when there's 10 minutes to go and it creates arguments. Someone's like, well, you just wait. And then it's like women bickering 24/7 about nothing. You know, you took the last bit of toast, that bit's branded than my bit. It's just like, honestly, it was a nightmare. 24/7. 24/7. Most volatile moments I experienced in prison is when we was indirectly protesting against something that had happened to one of our women. Maybe someone had been wrongfully sent to the seg or wrongfully locked behind their doors, or a whole wing could have potentially been locked in because of one individual. So those are the times when you saw people being volatile quite a lot, because you'd have some women saying, you know, just be quiet, they're just doing their job, and then you'd have the other ones that are emotional, like, yeah, but they should have done that, and then someone else jumps in, and then someone, and it just becomes like a big pile-up like rugby. It literally feels like a rugby match in there every day. So yeah, a lot of bickering about silly stuff, you know, hot water. It could be about anything, you know, the queue. Women used to argue about getting seconds, who's first in the seconds queue. It's like, we haven't even had first. You guys are arguing about the seconds. It's like, yeah, crazy stuff. But you just forget about the outside world because you have to. You can forget you're in prison. I've forgotten for weeks, you know, I just get into my sentence. And it doesn't mean I forget that I'm a mother or forget that I got a child. You have to kind of get on with what's happening in your day every day. So the officers in Bronzefield, you call them by their first name. And when you go to H&P, you're either Mr. whatever or Miss whatever. And my name is my surname. Never was I referred to as my prison number, ever. But I made a choice of referring to myself as my prison number in a way of not communicating with staff in the way that they felt like we were friends, because we were never friends, you know. So I don't think there was any space to have a good relationship with officers. I feel like as an inmate, I had to understand what their job was and know there's a boundary, because at the end of the day, laughy, laughy, jokey, jokey, key, the doors, you're still going to take that key and lock my door at the end of the night, you know. So what does that make us? So I used the officers to my advantage to make sure my days went well, you know. So that if I needed stuff doing, I had officers that were willing to do that for me. You know, I had officers that I'd let into my personal life just a little bit, so they would have, you know, a little bit more respect for you know, the way I behave, what I stand for, the way I maneuver around the prison, because you don't know. So in that respect, yes, I feel like I did have quite a good relationship with officers, because again, with Bronzefield, I went there twice. And the first time I went was my first time, very angry, rebellious, rah, you know, and by the time I went back, I'd transformed my whole being. And it didn't take long for the officers to realise that this is actually who I am, and they respected that and then started to support me. It's just knowing where you are, you know. Don't be in the prison and act like you and officers are friends. You're never going to be friends, you know. They are officers and you are a prisoner, that's it. And when shit actually, you know, gets real, you're not on the same side. They are going to turn against you. So we have to stick together as the women, no matter what, because we'd all get in trouble together, you know, but they're not willing to do that. They're never willing to step on our side and fight for us, like how we fight for ourselves. So yeah. So that's an interesting question. Witness suicide, self-harm, severe self-harm, and suicide on a regular basis. That was the hardest thing for me to deal with. And I'm trying to deal with it today. You know, the reality of people taking their life for so many different reasons in that situation, to know that you're in there and you have no one to live for. That breaks my heart, because I had a lot of bad days, but I have a child, and every day it was like, I have to live for her. I have to, you know, keep my mouth shut for her. I have to not argue for her. I have to, you know, let them do their job for her. Everything was for my daughter. So to know that someone was in there and didn't have anyone, I met women that had no one and they wanted to just take their life. You know, some of them did. So that was hard. I met some amazing women that I still have contact with now, but I think that is just being able to be in that space and meet some amazing women, just like myself, you know, because there's not anyone can go to prison. So I think that's what I'll take away with me from that, is that I learned that anyone can go to prison. Talking is good. You don't know what people have been through unless you talk, you know. So yeah, be vulnerable, take risks. Taught me to give a lot of advice. Yeah, that's what it did. It taught me to give a lot of advice. I believe that prisons can be as positive as the individual makes it. My prison experience, I have no regrets. I feel like it was one of the best experiences of my life. I feel like having support from family and friends is quite an important part of that as well. So I can only speak from my own experiences. But yeah, absolutely, there are positive things. There are a lot of projects and things that you do have access to, you know, if you want it. There's a lot of business opportunities in prison for the inmates to be able to get involved in long term and gain, accredited qualifications that will support their future. So again, prison is as positive as the individual chooses to make it. The system, the criminal justice system, makes prison a place that's not safe. They make it unsafe by the structure. But prison itself is not an unsafe place, no. But the way the system has it designed is definitely dangerous. I was a very different type of person to what I am now. And it took a lot from my own family and friends to understand that adjustment. I found my relationship with faith again. Rather than a religion, it was to know that I am being protected. There is something that is keeping me going every single day, away from the physical being of my child or my family. Like, something is keeping me going, So these are the good things that have come out of prison.
Thank you for watching this interview with Leiona Townsend-Bartley about life inside HMP Bronzefield. For more stories from Britain's underworld, from cop killers to fraudsters, make sure to like, hype and subscribe. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. We'll see you next time.